esteemed guests, distinguished speakers, experts from Indian automobile industry, media, ladies and gentlemen. A very good morning to all of you. I, Sitikonta Padi, on behalf of International Center for Automotive Technology, welcome you all to the panel discussion on localization of advanced automotive technology products. Recently, Government of India has approved the Production Linked Incentive (PLI) scheme for automobile and auto component industry in India for enhancing India's manufacturing capabilities for advanced automotive product with a budgetary outlay of 25,938 crore. The Production Linked Incentive (PLI) scheme for automobile and auto components proposes financial incentive to boost domestic manufacturing of advanced automotive technology products and attract investments in automotive manufacturing value chain. It is our privilege to have you all with us today for this session. This discussion is part of celebration of Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav. Government of India is celebrating Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav to commemorate 75 years of progressive India and the glorious history of its people, culture, and achievements. The entire week from 10th to 16 January 2022, ICAT organized and continues to host multiple activities and events to celebrate the Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav. On this occasion, we have received a message from our Honorable Heavy Industry Minister, Dr. Mahendranath Pandey, and Honorable Minister of State, Sri Krishna Pal Gujjar. In his message, they have said, Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav is an initiative of the Government of India to celebrate and commemorate 75 years of progressive India and the glorious history of its people, culture, and achievements. As part of this initiative, Ministry of Heavy Industries is celebrating the Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav from 10th to 16 January 2022. Ministry of Heavy Industry is focused on developing globally competitive green and technology-driven manufacturing sector, including automotive and capital goods sector, which propels growth and job creation. To achieve this vision, the ministry has launched a series of initiatives, including the faster adoption of manufacturing of electric vehicles, the FAME scheme, National Program on Advanced Chemistry Cell (ACC) battery storage, Production Linked Incentive, the PLI scheme for automobile and auto components, scheme for enhancement of competitiveness in the Indian capital goods sector, etc. As part of the celebration of Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav, Ministry of Heavy Industry, in association with its CPSEs and autonomous bodies, has planned a series of events and activities at over 40 locations across the country during the week 10th to 16 January 2022, focusing on the themes of Action at 75, Achievements at 75, Ideas at 75, Resolve at 75, and Freedom Struggle in the areas of innovation, manufacturing excellence, Atmanirbhar Bharat, environment and sustainability, Swachh Bharat, Swasth Bharat, using heroes of freedom struggles. The event includes inauguration, new product launches, technology demonstration, technical exhibitions, seminar, webinars, expert lectures, yoga and meditation sessions, health camps, cultural programs, cleanliness drives, and competitions among children and on freedom struggle and movements, etc. It has been emphasized to all units of ministry to follow whole government approach and ensure people's participation, that is, Jan Bhagidari, in the events and activities in the week-long celebrations. Directions have also been issued to ensure COVID-19 social distancing and hygiene protocols during the event and activities. We urge everyone to participate in the planned celebration of Ministry of Heavy Industries from 10th to 16 January 2022 under Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav. We thank the Honorable Ministers for their encouraging words. Through this webinar, we have set a virtual stage to build awareness through the insight by industry experts. We have with us esteemed presence of Srimati Pavila Tikku, Senior General Manager and Chief Business Officer, International Center for Automotive. Srimati Pavila Tikku has a rich and varied experience of over 30 years in the automotive sector. In 2010, she took charge of the Powertrain Department of ICAT, one of the leading homologation centers in the country. In addition to the equipment planning and procurement activities under NATRIP, Powertrain Department capabilities at ICAT have been drastically enhanced to cater not only to the certification up to BS6 standards, but also for the development and calibration to meet such regulations. In 2016, her role was enhanced to Chief Business Officer, looking after business development and planning for ICAT. I thank you, ma'am. I would like to request ma'am to deliver her welcome address. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Sitikant. Thank you. Distinguished guest, Honorable guest, Dr. Pavan Goenka, keynote speaker for this webinar, panelist for this webinar, Mr. Kiran Deshmukh from Sona Comstar, Mr. A. Vishwanath from Delphi TVS, Mr. Vikram Gulati from Toyota Kirloskar, Mr. Guru Prasad Mutlapur from Bosch, Mr. Vinny Mehta from ACMA, and the panel will be moderated by Mr. Kavan Mukhtiar from PwC. Colleagues from automotive industry, fellow ICATian students from various colleges, ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning to all of you. Although this welcome address was later to be delivered by Director ICAT, Mr. Dinesh Tyagi, but because of his health being not well, he could not join this webinar today. On behalf of Director ICAT, Mr. Dinesh Tyagi, I welcome you all in this webinar on localization of advanced automotive technology products. ICAT has already conducted multiple sessions in last 5 days as part of the celebration of Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav, week of Ministry of Heavy Industry, starting from January 10th to January 16, 2022. This week-long celebration by Ministry of Heavy Industry is being undertaken under the celebration of 75 years of India's independence, and it's called as Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav, a short form called AKAM. This Mahotsav is dedicated to people of India who have not only been instrumental in bringing India thus far in its evolutionary journey, but also hold within them the power and potential to enable Honorable Prime Minister Narendra Modi's vision of activating India 2.0 fueled by the spirit of Atmanirbhar Bharat. Government has recently issued a notification regarding production linked scheme, PLI scheme for automobile and auto components. The PLI scheme for auto sector envisages overcoming the cost disabilities of the industry for manufacture of advanced automotive technology products in India. The incentive structure will encourage industry to make fresh investments in indigenizing the products locally and being self-reliant. The scheme of automobile and auto component will be implemented over a period of 5 years, starting from financial year 2022 to 23. PLI scheme has enlisted over 100 advanced automotive technology components, which include hydrogen fuel cells, hydrogen injection system, electric motors for electric vehicles, master control units to optimize the performance of CNG fuel engine, lightweight cryogenic cylinders for storing LNG in automobiles, fuel pump for gasoline direct injections, etc., which are eligible for incentives under this scheme. The incentive structure will encourage industry to make fresh investment for the indigenous global supply chain for AAT products. This initiative is taken by Government of India to make India and Indian automotive industry self-reliant and be global suppliers for the automotive products and not be dependent on the imports. As of date, 115 companies have filed their application under PLI scheme, which was notified on 23rd of September 2021. As electric propulsion and connected vehicles are making steady inroads into the Indian automobile market, and as the reality of autonomous cars is getting closer every day, advanced driver systems, ADAS, will be bridging the gap between the traditional cars and the cars of tomorrow. ADAS technology has a major role to play in reducing human-related errors and in enhancing the safety, which is the primary focus of automotive and transportation industry. As India is one of the largest producers of automobile vehicles in the world, we cannot afford to be dependent on imports of new automotive technology and related parts. COVID-19 has made industry all across realize the perils of import dependence. Supply chains globally were halted. The automobile sale was impacted even though the demand was there, because there were import restrictions, or there was shortage of components for which the vehicle manufacturers were dependent on. And hence, this is a opportunity for India and Indian automobile industry to become self-reliant and enable India not to become only a production-based economy, but a technology-based economy. And I'm sure various initiatives of Government of India which are being taken up will enable Indian automotive industry in that direction. I'm very happy to note the intense deliberation are planned over next hour on the topic of localization of advanced automotive technology products. We have an amazing panel of experts, and I'm sure Dr. Goenka, being a visionary, will definitely set path towards achieving the objectives of self-reliance of automotive industry through his keynote address. In concluding, I wish a very successful and fruitful deliberation today. I hope that you all are safe in the present situation of COVID-19, which is groping everywhere. India is not untouched. We are facing the brunt of the third wave in a big way in India. And I hope and pray that this wave is over by the end of January and we come back to our normal business as usual scenario. Once again, have a happy new year and have a safe and secure life. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am, for flagging off this webinar with an enlightening inaugural address and for all your support and guidance in organizing this session. The prime objective of the scheme includes overcoming cost disabilities, creating economies of scale, and building a robust supply chain in areas of advanced automotive technology products. It will also generate employment. The scheme will facilitate the automobile industry to move up the value chain into higher value added products. The PLI scheme for automotive sector will enable India to leapfrog from traditional fossil fuel based automobile transportation system to environmentally cleaner, sustainable, advanced and more efficient electric vehicle based system. I'm so pleased to be associated and to have the chance to introduce our esteemed speaker. It is an honor for me to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Pavan Goenka. He needs no introduction, but for the audience, I'll introduce him. Dr. Pavan Goenka has completed his BTech in Mechanical Engineering from IIT Kanpur and PhD from Cornell University, USA. He is also graduated is a graduate of Advanced Management Program from Harvard Business School. He worked at General Motors R&D Center in Detroit, USA from 1979 to 1993 and received several awards during his tenure at GM. Dr. Goenka joined Mahindra & Mahindra Limited in 1993 as General Manager R&D development of the Scorpio SUV. Dr. Goenka is also credited with building a strong R&D infrastructure, a robust product portfolio for Mahindra, and is widely recognized as a statesman of Indian auto industry. Dr. Goenka served on the board of several Mahindra Group companies, both domestic and international. He retired from Mahindra as Managing Director and CEO on 1st April 2021. We are honored to welcome you, sir. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Pamela. Good to see you. Very concerned to hear about Mr. Tyage's health. I hope he's doing well and will recover and be back in full force soon. On a lighter vein, the keynote address has already been given by Pamela, so I'll have to quickly change what I was going to say. But the easier thing for me to say is that pretty much everything that I want to say, I have said before. And probably everyone in the audience has heard me singing the same tune, not just in the last 6 months, but perhaps for the last 10, 15 years, where I have talked in various forums, AKAM, annual conference, or on TV, one-on-one meeting with suppliers, and supplier conferences, and the Goa meet very recently. Pretty much giving the same message that Indian automotive industry really needs to do a lot more in terms of technology and in terms of localizing, and I'll come to that in a second. And localizing component is something that I have personally been very passionate about, going way back to the days of my working in Scorpio in 97, 98. And some of you perhaps were there at that time and will remember how much I used to push for localizing, even if you are a multinational supplier, to make it in India. And I'm very delighted to see that in the last several months, there is tremendous focus, tremendous thrust that has come on localizing, especially the advanced automotive technology. Let me start off by saying that the scheme of PLI that has been designed and announced by MHI, I call it a smart scheme. The reason I'm calling it a smart scheme, that the 26,000 crore of outlay that has been put down for something that I think is just the right focus, and not just giving away money, not also holding back money, just the right focus on where the Indian automotive industry, both suppliers and the OEMs, require some government facilitation, some government push, some government incentive to do what all of us want to do. And therefore, if you look at the list of components that have been included in the PLI scheme, you will all agree with me that these are the components that just are short of being viable to be made in India or local value addition happening, either because of technology not being there, or because technology is very complex, very expensive, requires a lot bigger scale than what India may have. And therefore, little push from the government would help the OEMs and the suppliers to localize these components. When I look at the list of ADAS, infotainment, telematics, connected car, BS6, exhaust system, GDI, ECUs of all types, airbag inflators, OBD, CVT, DCA, AT, sensors, etc., etc., etc. Clearly, a lot of thought has been given into what should be incentivized in the PLI scheme. And I also want to say that PLI scheme should not be taken by anyone, whether you're a supplier or an OEM, as an handout and easy money coming to you in your bottom line. Because the purpose of the PLI scheme is not to improve the bottom line of suppliers and OEMs, but to help them localize these components, sort of bridge the gap for a few years. And year 6, there is no PLI. And so if in year 6 you have not by that time gotten your cost structure right, if you have not gotten the scale right, we are back to square one, and we should not expect another PLI scheme to come in 2027. And therefore, the big task in front of us is how do we make sure that we take advantage of the PLI scheme and do everything that needs to be done for India to be competitive, both in terms of cost and in terms of technology in these various components. I would also say that auto PLI scheme, perhaps in some sense, is one of the most generous schemes, because the benefit that is being given is north of 10%, 12, 13, 16, 17%, up to 17%. And I'm involved in many PLI schemes, and there is no scheme that goes to this extent of incentivizing. And so therefore, any cost disability that we may have should be wiped out with the help of the PLI scheme, at least for the next 4 or 5 years. Now, we all know that auto industry is amongst the large complex manufacturing industries, most Atmanirbhar of any industry. And even before the term was coined by our Honorable Prime Minister, auto industry has been focusing for 2 decades on becoming Atmanirbhar. Yet, if you look at the data, one would feel that there is still a lot to do. Look at the import data, for example. An industry that is less than $100 billion in terms of revenue has an import component of $25 billion. That's 23 or 24%, I'm told, is the total import that happens in automotive industry. And when I look at what is being imported, I sometimes wonder, why is it that we have to import that? And I'm just looking at some data here. Fasteners, we are importing 2,500 crores worth of fasteners. And I find it hard to believe why that has to happen. We are importing 4,500 crores worth of body and chassis components. I find it hard to believe why that has to happen. So, but these are not AATs. These are things that should not require any government subsidy for us to localize them. So then my first message to all of you who are listening is that at least look at those things first, where there is no advanced technology, where it's simply a matter of investment and scale and become competitive, because there is no shortage of expertise available in India to localize those things. And these are what I would call low-hanging fruits, can be done almost immediately, and that we must focus on without the PLI scheme. And when I look at export, and I'll come to AATs in a second, but when I look at export, you all know that we are exporting only about $15 billion worth of components in an industry where the trade of components, that is cross-border trade of components, is 1.2 or 1.3 trillion dollars. That means we are just at about 1.2, 1.3%. It's well-known data by now. And there's no reason why India should not be supplying a lot more than that in the export market. India has one of the most evolved supplier base. And I'm really proud of the way the Indian supplier base has evolved over the last 20-25 years. And there's nothing that our Indian suppliers cannot do. And therefore, not being able to export much more than what we're exporting today has no justification. And once again, PLI scheme should help us in doing so. Now, Indian Auto Component Association, AKAM and SIAM, both have collaborated and have come out with a very good report, very exhaustive analysis they've done, and I would consider it Bible of localization now. They have gone through very minute details, and I do not know if that report is in public domain. Maybe Vinny can talk about that later. And I don't want to steal the thunder from the report, but what we see there is that almost three countries, China, EU, and Korea, represent 62% of import in India, and three categories: engines, drivelines, and electronics and electricals are about 62% of import. And this is what will come into the AAT in a big way. AAT really is focusing on these things. If you look at the list that I just read out for you, and before the PLI scheme was announced, SIAM AKAM had targeted about $3 to $4 billion worth of localization out of the 25 billion that we are importing over the next 3-4 years. And I would hope that with the PLI scheme, that number will go up from 3 or 4 billion to maybe 8 or 10 billion over the time of the next 4 or 5 years. And from there, we will be looking up. Now, when we are looking at localizing, there are three players: the India-based suppliers, the multinational suppliers, and the OEMs. And each one of them has a very strong role to play to make this happen. Now, India-based suppliers, if I just talk in general terms, they have to invest in technology, which I have been, again, talking for the last decade plus, that they must invest. And a lot more is happening. I'm not saying that investment in technology is not happening. But for the size of the industry that we are and where we rank in the world, I think we can do a lot more in terms of investing in technology. And therefore, have your own design and make those designs in India. The India-based suppliers also have to, and this applies to everyone, but I'm just saying in context of India-based suppliers, also have to really carry the tier 2s and tier 3s along with them. They should not be importing the tier 2, tier 3 supplies from outside India. They have to develop their own tier 2 and tier 3 in India. And again, I'm not saying it's not being done, but still there are some gaps that we must fill. And it's known that sometimes to work with Indian tier 2, tier 3 will take little more effort than simply importing these things, may even cost a few pennies more than importing these things, but and may in fact have some quality issues, and you'll have to work harder with them to make this happen. But in the long run, if you don't do that, how are we going to sort of reduce our import and focus more and more on local value addition? So this is almost like a duty of tier 1 suppliers, whether you are India-based or MNC, to do that. When I come to MNC, of course, they have to do what I said for Indian suppliers, but they have a little bit more in terms of what India would expect from them. What I have noticed, and I've said this before in my AKAM speech last year or year before, that hardly any multinational supplier, large multinational supplier, has India as their what I would consider a mother plant for anything. India is almost always the last operation or last few operations for supply into India. And again, I'm not saying there aren't other things happening. I'm just talking in terms of the bulk supplying in India. And I have said this many times that India, the MNCs have to look at where India can have a mother plant for them, and how India can become part of their global value chain. Now, I would also say that it's not simply up to the multinational suppliers to do that. India also has to provide the infrastructure for that to happen. Because if we are a global part of global value chain, they cannot afford any disruption in the intermediate goods, which will feed into somewhere else. And we are still short of getting that to global standard of having absolutely seamless infrastructure so that there is no disruption. And then third, I would talk about OEMs. And I think OEMs have perhaps even a bigger role to play than the suppliers in terms of local manufacturing, local value addition, because finally, suppliers are supplying to OEMs. And if OEMs demand that you have to make in India, suppliers would have no option but to make in India, right? Now, again, sometimes it's an easier route to simply import something that's well developed somewhere else. But if we were to look at what is in the longer term interest of a country, then I think OEMs have to see how they will go the extra mile to try and get these components manufactured in India. And again, I've never said that we should make everything in India. There are things that makes no sense for us to make in India, but there are lots of things that are important today that we should be making in India. And then just a little bit on, and therefore I would say that the Indian OEMs have to nurture suppliers and sometimes arm twist, sometimes cajole, sometimes incentivize to the suppliers to make in India. And of course, there's a lot of direct import that's happening by OEMs, and they have to look very hard to see what out of these direct imports can actually be sourced from within India. So if I was to combine these three things, I see absolutely no reason, with or without PLI scheme, and PLI scheme just makes it easier. I see absolutely no reason why the $25 billion inflation adjusted and growth adjusted should not become half over time, over the next 4 to 5 years. And SIAM and AKAM, like I said, have made a master plan, and I'm sure in the panel discussion we'll hear more about that. And finally, I just want to spend a couple of minutes on EV opportunity. This is again something that I've been talking about for 10 years, and I've almost lost credibility because I've been saying that EVs are about to take off for the last 10 years. I've been saying that, but finally, the day is here when EVs are taking off, not about to, but are taking off. And clearly, two-wheelers and three-wheelers, all the constraints of why EVs are not acceptable have been removed. There's significant growth that's happening on the two-wheeler segment, almost doubling the volume last year compared to the year before. And again, I'm sure it'll double or maybe even more than double in 2022. Same thing happening in three-wheeler. There was some setback because of COVID. There was a momentum loss, but now momentum is coming back. And both two-wheeler and three-wheeler now are commercially viable, three-wheeler for commercial application and two-wheeler for personal use. And therefore, there's nothing stopping them from growing. And buses, we have seen now, are very affordable. But again, we have to keep in mind that this is with three very large support, financial support coming from the government: the GST, the FAME2, and the PLI, now which has recently been announced. So with PLI, of course, it becomes very affordable. But these are not going to be there forever. These are not going to be there forever. And 5 years from now, I cannot see how government of India can afford to continue with 5% GST in electric vehicles, because that's a very big source of revenue. And electric vehicles become mainstream, they cannot lose that revenue. So GST ought to go up. Everybody has to count on that. FAME2 will disappear in a couple of years. PLI will go away in 5 years. And therefore, 2027, we have to be able to supply electric vehicles at the affordable price to the customer, desirable price, without having the benefit of these three big sort of incentives, including what states are doing today. And I think in PLI scheme, almost everything to do with electric vehicles has been included, and therefore everybody should take advantage of that and make it happen. And just before I conclude, I just want to talk about Vision 2047, which has been initiated by Honorable Prime Minister. Automotive industry is one of the sectors which is being looked at for Vision 2047. SIAM and perhaps even AKMA, I'm not aware, prepared a document of what they would like to see. I think we need to really think very big. We really need to think aspirational on where Indian auto industry should be in Vision 2047, in 2047, 100 years of independence. And I'm sure, though today that may not be deliberated, but as we work more and more on that, we need to come up with something that that is very aspirational, that will excite everyone, and then the whole industry and the government need to work together to make that happen. So with that, I would like to thank ICAT for giving this opportunity to talk to you. Once again, the same thing that I've been saying in different words, maybe not even different words, same words. And thank you for listening to me. And I look forward to the panel discussion that will happen. I'll probably turn my video and audio off, but I will be listening. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for your insightful words.
Thank you, sir, for your wonderful keynote address. Now we'll commence our panel discussion session on localization in advanced automotive technology products. I'm sure that this panel discussion will serve as a platform to clear all our doubts related to indigenization of advanced automotive technology products. So without much ado, I would like to invite moderator of the session, Sri Kavan Mukhtiar, partner PwC. Sri Kavan has over 25 years of experience in automotive sector. His area of expertise lies in automotive strategy and operation consulting. His recent work involves electric mobility, automotive electronics and software, connected vehicles. He is PwC India's automotive sector leader and is responsible for shaping the vision and strategy for serving automotive clients. We welcome you, sir. I'm privileged to introduce our panel members for this session. Our first panel member is Sri Vikram Gulati. He's currently working as country head and executive vice president of corporate affairs and governance at Toyota Kirloskar Motor Private Limited. He is a postgraduate in chemistry from St. Stephen's College, Delhi University, and holds a management degree from Management Development Institute, Gurgaon, Haryana, India. Earlier, while serving as a civil servant in IRPS 1992 batch, he has a rich and varied experience of over 22 years of working in the government in various capacities. Our next panel member is Sri A. Vishwanathan. Sri A. Vishwanathan is a chartered accountant with a degree in industrial engineering and an MBA in marketing. He is a bachelor in general law and a certified information systems auditor. He was director of finance and business planning in Western India and subsequently served as the country managing director for 7 years. In the year 2018, he joined as president of Delphi TVS, a joint venture between TVS Group and Bob Warner, one of the largest global automotive component companies. The next panel member is Sri Kiran Deshmukh. Sri Kiran Manohar Deshmukh is the Chief Technology Officer of Sona BLW Precision Forging Limited. He holds a bachelor degree of technology in metallurgy engineering from the Indian Institute of Technology, Bombay. He has over 40 years of experience in automotive component manufacturing. He has worked in the areas of manufacturing, process control, design, quality assurance, marketing, and R&D in addition to general management. He is responsible for, among others, developing new technology, partnerships, and building competencies in manufacturing excellence in the company. The next panel member is Sri Guru Prasad Mudlapur. He is currently the Chief Technology Officer of Bosch Limited, Designate President and Managing Director of Bosch Automotive Electronics India Private Limited, Bangalore. Since January 2018, he also heads the Project House of Electrification within Bosch India. He joined Bosch in August 2008 and held various roles in engineering management. From 2013 to 2016, he was the Vice President Electronics Engineering, responsible for the entire electronics control unit design and development. Our last but not the least panel member is Sri Vinay Mehta. He is currently the Director General of Automotive Component Manufacturers Association, AKAM. He joined AKAM in 2010 through his expertise in the field engineering. He has bachelor's degree in electrical engineering from BHU Banrasi, postgraduate diploma in business management from Faculty of Management Studies, University of Delhi, and executive master's in international trade and finance from IITF. I welcome everyone to this session. I now request Sri Kavan Mukhtiar to take over. Over to you, Kavan, sir.
So good morning and a very happy new year to all the panelists as well as the attendees. It's indeed my privilege and honor to be on this panel. So I would like to thank ICAT and Ministry of Heavy Industries for inviting me and PwC to be part of this whole session. A very warm welcome to the August panel that we have. And I think Dr. Goenka has set the stage really well on what's cut out for the industry. And let me go back a little bit in time. And when I started my career in the automotive industry as a young mechanical engineer, for me it was always a mystery how these swanky looking vehicles are made globally, and I would dream that when would it be made in India? And now when I see the kind of products that are coming out, whether it's on the luxury vehicle side or even the big trucks, I think Indian auto component and auto OEM industry has made tremendous strides. And we are now, in my opinion, really at a stage where we have the launch pad to go into the next level and prepare for the future of the automotive industry in many ways. And I do believe that the automotive PLI, in many ways, it will act as that catalyst for giving the industry the opportunity to build local capabilities further. Going back in time, with the Maruti project and many other, foreign investments that came in, started the wave of localization. So in many ways, as Dr. Goenka said, we have been doing this. And now we are going to the next level of the challenge, which is really bringing those technologies within the supply chain where we are currently weak. So the panel discussion for today, in many ways, is what I propose is we begin by really peeling the details a little bit further. That as Dr. Goenka said, there are many parts, components where still a lot of imports is happening. And let's understand a little bit deeper, why are these companies really doing it? Whether it's multinationals or Indian, is it a technology gap? Is it a scale gap? Or is it just that the HQs are making some of these decisions? Because like in India, we are trying to ask for localization. Every country in the world, whether it's Indonesia or US, or everybody wants, industry to localize and buy more locally. So, with that nationalistic policies that every country is following, how is the global auto industry dealing with it? And what role can India play to offer a value proposition that is really strong? So this and many more points we'll hear from our very august panel. So the way I propose to do this session is we will do it in 3 rounds. We'll first begin with you, Mr. Gulati, and then go to subsequent speakers. And then we will come back for the second round of questions. Finally, at the end of the 15 minutes plus, I hope that we will be able to portray a picture of what is the roadmap for localization for India and what are some of the key things that as industry we need to address. So with that, let me begin with you, Mr. Gulati. Let's understand, and Toyota Kirloskar, of course, it's a joint venture, but being part of the Toyota family globally, what is the view that you are able to get about the Indian market, especially with respect to localization? Yes, Toyota has localized quite a bit, but as Dr. Goenka mentioned, there's further scope to do it. So what are some of the challenges, or where do you think the Indian supply chain is weak? Why don't we begin with that?
Good morning to all. Good morning. I hope I'm audible. Yeah, okay. First of all, thanks to ICAT for having me on the panel. It's really a privilege, and I'd like to take off from what Dr. Goenka said. He referred to some statistics relating to the current state of affairs in terms of the imports that are happening, and I think the key takeaway that one must note is the level of imports right now is much higher than what it should be. B, it's happening in areas where conventionally one would think it's difficult to justify why is import happening in those particular parts. For example, quoting from the same study, the transmission, steering column, engines, electricals, and electronics, they obviously constitute, like Dr. Goenka said, around 60 to 70% of the import level right now. As far as Toyota is concerned, we've always believed in creating a strong local ecosystem, local supplier base, and although our market share is extremely small as compared to many others, right? We are around 4 to 5% in terms of volumes. But over our journey over the last 20 years, I'm very proud to say that for our mainline products like the Fortuner and the Innova, our level of localization is almost around 85, 86%. 95% of the steel that we use is consumed from Indian sources. And this is important because Sixth on the list of the highest imports is basically, steel. That is major input. Now, looking at the situation, why these imports are happening, there are various reasons for it. There are, of course, the fundamental factors that automotive industry is a global supply chain based industry. Till now, of course, disruptions may cause some changes to happen to this due to COVID. But the second fact really is that there are areas where there is either not availability of the technology or no supply base at all. For example, electronics and ECUs, there is no ecosystem that exists in the country, and hence there is no other way but to import. Of course, the PLI that are now being announced, that will definitely help to change the current situation. But I think the other important fact one has to look at is what Dr. Goenka again was alluding to. It's not just about shallow localization, maybe at tier 1 level. Maybe the aspiration has to be level 2, level 3, going down. And this becomes important not only for the current set of advanced technologies, but the technologies that are going to be there in the near future, with greater degree of electrification taking off, and with automation and the connected car technologies coming in. Therefore, one must also note that there is another PLI, couple of PLIs that have come in, which are going to be very relevant to the auto sector. One, of course, is the PLI on the advanced energy storage, advanced batteries. That is really going to be important, because if we are going to shift towards electrification, the battery is amongst the highest in terms of input costs, and therefore that is one which is going to be critical. Second, of course, is the PLIs that have been announced towards the electronic side. Couple of things that we have to do, other than these interventions which have already been put in place, is to also develop the capability and capacity of the local ecosystem, because that is a very important factor that determines whether you are competitive globally, either in terms of costs or in terms of quality. Both of these are critical factors when you are making a decision to buy, because ultimately the product you want to put before the consumer is one which is of highest quality and without failure. So those will be my initial thoughts that I would like to place before the panel. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mr. Gulati. So clearly, I think one of the key things that you mentioned is about capability and capacity. And of course, capability is something we've talked about a lot, but also about capacity, because at times, Indian supply chain is operating at certain volumes, and to build global scale, you need big investments. We'll come back to that point again, and we'll go a little bit deeper. But let me now invite Mr. Kiran Deshmukh from Sona Comstar. Of course, Sona is now a global company with Indian roots, and we would like to know from your perspective. I'm sure as CTO you do interact a lot with your global colleagues. Where does India fit in, and with our localization agenda, what do you think are some of the areas that we need to build in terms of our supply chain? Over to you, Mr. Deshmukh.
Good morning, Kavan and everybody else. Yeah, I think, am I audible?
Yes.
Okay. So I think Dr. Goenka and Mr. Gulati already have covered a lot of this. We are importing a lot of stuff which we should not be importing. It's true. But if you look at our imports, I think as Dr. Goenka also mentioned, 60-65% of the imports come from Asia, which is China, South Korea, and Japan. And there are two reasons for these. If I were to just list those, the two reasons for these imports is either we don't have the technology to make those parts in India, or we are not competitive. that it is cheaper to import it from outside, from China, basically. And so these are the two ends. I mean, we look at, for example, in I think two-wheelers, we import the aluminum wheels. Almost 70% of two-wheeler alloy wheels are imported from China because of the cost advantage. Of course, over the last 2-3 years, I believe that there has been localization taking place because of the push from the OEMs and, of course, the cost reduction. On the other hand, like Dr. Goenka mentioned, I think electronics parts, advanced emissions, safety products, these are imported simply because the technology doesn't exist. And the reason for that is the scale. I mean, we don't have the kind of volumes which are required to justify for the R&D investments. We have seen very fast adaptation of BS6. So there was not enough time for localization because there are testing, validation, and all those cycles which takes very long time in automotive. When it comes to electric vehicles, I think there was a lot of haziness around the policy. We didn't know what is going to happen, and the electric vehicle itself is with all the ecosystem, and one did not know how this industry is going to take shape, and therefore a lot of investment did not happen in the past. So now with the PLI, I think we believe that that's going to accelerate localization a great deal. There's a lot of clarity about the government policies around electrification of vehicles. So all these things are going to change, and definitely there will be localization taking place. But like Dr. Goenka mentioned, again, I think there are three things. Number one is the technology investment that companies need to do. And that investments could be investing for developing internal capabilities. It could be for acquiring those capabilities from outside. It could be mergers, acquisitions. And the second thing is development of the tier 2s and tier 3s, because the industry depends. The automotive industry is a tiered industry, and tier 1s cannot do everything by themselves. They have to depend on tier 2s and tier 3s, and these are all fragmented companies, small companies, and they need a lot of support. I mean, they need basic support in quality upgradation so that they can become global quality levels. So a lot of things need to be done. I think automotive industry has done a lot of things over past decades, and we know how it has evolved and it has come to this stage. And with these little pushes and the changes which are happening around us, I'm sure we will be able to overcome these problems.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Deshmukh. So I think clearly the tier 2 and tier 3 and how we can have an institutional framework for developing this is going to be one of the key elements of how fast we can localize, because we know, I mean, of course, localization at the tier 1 level is very high, but when you dig a little bit deeper and go to tier 2, tier 3, a lot of components may still be coming from imports. Let's move forward to Mr. Guru Prasad Mudlapur from Bosch. So Guru Prasad, may I request you to share your views, please?
Sure. Thanks, Kavan. And I must apologize to everyone. I can't be on video. I have a little personal emergency attending to my father at a clinic, so I do it from there. And if you hear some background noises, please pardon me. Okay, so if you look at the conventional auto component industry, and Mr. Goenka also spoke a lot about it, we are very, very well localized, and the supply chain is also extremely well established and organized. And it's the advanced products where we still have quite some challenge. I'll speak about a few of them that we are going through as an MNC or as tier 1 operating out of India. The first one would be probably the ramp up and scaling not available from a market perspective. So in that sense, bringing in advanced technologies like driver assist, for example, radar and cameras. I think the penetration rates are simply not there, and that makes introduction of these components into our manufacturing lines that much more difficult. The second issue I can flag off is the raw materials and the child parts are not always available in the local supply chain. A classic example of this is the electronics localization, where we have still serious difficulties with electronics, semiconductors, auto-grade PCBs even, and this makes it that much more tricky. The third one is the fact that India has had good FTAs with ASEAN, where there is already a large scale, and many of the components that we get thanks to this FTA become more or less cost neutral, irrespective of where they are produced, and we need to really see what additional motivations can we bring in, be it market related, be it possibility to set India as an export base for global manufacturing and things like that. Typical components which for us fall in this category are the multimedia, car multimedia stuff, the clusters, the displays, and so on. And when we look at another completely different aspect, there's also a lot of advanced technology development happening for us globally, and a lot of it, of course, also happens out of Germany for us. This also means that there is a technology and IP cost that we'll have to factor in, which is typically 5 to 7%, depending on the product and the kind of technology and so on. And all, and this also starts to play a key role, for which we need to intensify our own local engineering capabilities and local engineering content, to avoid that we have to transfer big amounts of technology and IP costs. So this is also a major factor we are looking at. So typically the global MNC decisions are not always based on incentives, which can be short term, and in case of the current set of incentives, they're extremely well thought out and very well made. So I'm sure this will be a big benefit to us. But we also, at least our global boards, they also look at the fact that the incentives are offered at multiple countries. How do we choose? And so this kind of debates keep going on. And in the long term, I think it's always a factor of how good the market is. And in our traditional ICE world, where we succeed is because we have a really good market which demands high levels of localization with significant volumes and feature penetrations, and that's what is keeping us going here. And we need to push ourselves into that mode. So working together to have advanced technology and bringing that into a good level of investment in the ecosystem, coupled with a stable policy regime, and of course supply chain development. So if we can start to put these actions together, we believe as a global MNC we are on a good path, and we are of course doing a lot of this ourselves in India now.
Thank you very much, Guru Prasad. I think definitely all very, very good points. What I would like to pick in second round of our interaction is especially the FTA with ASEAN that you talked about, and how, you know, just incentive may not be motivation enough, because you already have capacity, say in Bosch in Thailand or in any other country. So imports is a lot easier. So we'll come back to that in a little bit, but let me go now across to Mr. A. Vishwanathan from Delphi TVS. Vish, over to you, please.
Thank you, Karan, and good morning to everyone. First of all, very happy New Year and a healthy and safe New Year. At the outset, I'd like to really compliment and congratulate the government on coming out with a wonderful scheme, the PLI. You know, people may say couple of things here and there, you know, could be changed, etc. But the fact is, they have taken so much of aspects into account, and this is what I like to think of as 5S. In the auto world, we always talk a lot about 5S. And when I look at this, the way this PLI scheme has been framed, you have, first of all, sustainability in terms of alternate fuel vehicles. And so that's one box which is ticked very well by this scheme. And second, you have smart vehicles, which is what's going to be in the future. We're going to see in vehicles across the entire spectrum. And that's again covered in this through all the connected vehicles. Then we have safety covered through ADAS, airbags. Then we have the fourth S, I would like to call it scale. So here you see that this is not only helping import substitution, but helping the Indian industry to be competitive and building a base for exports. So through that, there's a lot of opportunity to build a scale. And finally, the fifth one, of course, the all-encompassing self-reliance that this whole scheme would result in. I think phenomenal job everybody involved with the scheme has done in coming out with something that's addressing all these issues. Now, coming to your specific point, Kavan, on the localization, I think a lot of what I wanted to say has been said by the previous speakers, but there are a few things I would like to bring up. One is the availability of specialized steel, for especially if you look at the engine components side. One major hindrance is the availability of specialized steel in the country. And not only availability, but also price-wise, we find it's cheaper to actually import. Now, the PLI scheme that government has introduced for specialty, we all hope for specialty steel, what the government has introduced, we all hope would help address this gap. The second thing is the availability of tier 2, tier 3 suppliers who are good in high precision machining. That's still a challenge. There's a lot of stuff that requires submicron machining. And so and the kind of quality requirements that is there. We are working in building and enhancing the tier 2 capability in this regard, but it's taking longer than what we expect. The third thing, of course, is the technology availability. And the fact that when you look at many of the MNCs, even those who are the tier 2 or tier 3 players making critical subcomponents which go into the system, many of them have put up world-scale facilities in China. And so they don't want to, at this stage, invest in additional capacity. Now, there is always the opportunity, as many of these companies are thinking of, a China plus one strategy. The opportunity lies for us if we can encourage them to come in, even through the PLI scheme. One of the possibilities is if we could allow second-hand capital, because what we will see is someone who's got 4 or 5 lines in China would be willing to shift 1 or 2 lines from China to India. And to encourage them to do that, if that can also be allowed under the PLI scheme, I think that will give a fillip to this opportunity. Thank you, Alan.
Thank you, Vish. So interesting new definition of the 5S and very catchy at that. Thank you for that. Let's move to Vinny. Vinny, of course, you have a view of both sides, being Director General at AKAM on what are some of the asks from the OEMs as well as the challenges that the suppliers are facing. So, what is your view on this topic of especially the challenges, why we have struggled in certain segments, whether it's electronics or drivetrain, to localize in the country? Over to you.
Yeah, so Kavan, thank you much, and thank you ICAT for having me. Kavan, I think the reasons why companies import, and I'm speaking very generic, not alluding to OEMs or components alone. So one is, of course, price competitiveness, okay, and that is in some sense linked to scales, okay. We may not have, either the tier 2s or the tier 3s or even the volumes. Second is technology. We may not have the right technology, and this is very true for electronics and some of the other items such as the ADAS and the radars and the LiDARs and stuff like that. Third, of course, is companies, especially the MNCs, have their own strategic sourcing, which is in some sense determined or directed by their headquarters, and they do not, the local offices do not have much say, and they take a very global view of things. And of course, there are at times which doesn't is not spelled out very clearly, is cultural aspects in certain companies or the geographies that they belong to. And I mean no offense, largely this happens in the Japanese and the Koreans, and they may operate in karetsus and they may operate in chaebols, and these are these very strict cultural aspects that play in, and they will not in some sense flirt with other geographies in sourcing. So there are many aspects that go into the whole thing. But having said that, I think the way so what has actually in something very welcome is these PLI schemes that everybody has alluded to, not just related to the automotive sector, but also relevant to some of the other sectors where a lot of, so the mood is suddenly on localization in the whole industry, and that is something really good to push it. And honestly, if you look at from a pure mathematics perspective, when you look from a bottom line perspective, every year the dollar is strengthening by almost 5%, okay. And to remain competitive, we have to localize. There is no choice. So these are my opening remarks, and everybody else is covered most of. I'm not getting into details of the components or the countries of imports and stuff like that. Much has been spoken, but we can move on to the next set of questions. Yeah.
Sure. So let's dig deeper now on how to make it happen. I think round one was all about, what are some of the challenges we faced, and, now let's talk a little bit about, I think the government has done its part. So what I would request the panelists is, let's park on the side any other key things that we want from the government. Let's talk about what we as industry can do to now take advantage of whatever we have and push the agenda forwards in terms of localization. So, why don't it, Mr. Gulati, I'd request you to give your comments on what would it take, for example, for an OEM and Toyota as such to localize further in India. And you did talk about demand, and of course, demand is something which is not directly in our control. There can be some interventions, but beyond demand into specific initiatives in terms of supplier development, and Toyota is very well known around the world for really partnering and helping suppliers to scale up further. Also, I would like you to comment on the tier 2 and tier 3 space. Over to you, Mr. Gulati.
Yeah, thank you. Like I mentioned a while back in my earlier response, the level of localization that we were able to achieve in India in the past with the lower volumes that we have was primarily on account of our strong engagement with our supplier base, and that goes to the level of taking responsibility and helping them develop both in terms of processes which are much more efficient and encourage good quality output, and also individual training. So for instance, every year we spend around 8,500 man hours and 4,000 man hours respectively on these two aspects with the supply chain, and this is a commitment I think that we all have to do in terms of hand holding the supply chain down to tier 3 if we are to make them competitive, if we are to make them efficient, and if we are to make them provide products which are meeting the quality requirements that one looks for. Besides this inherent efficiency improvements that the industry can do, and along with introduction of technologies and trying to seed them in the country. And I think the other things that would be necessary, and I take this point from what Dr. Goenka said, and it was something very important. He says, what he said was, look, at this point, at this juncture, the PLI is basically helping us meet cost disadvantages. So it's basically around what is inherent within the industry, in companies, OEM, supply base, and also external to it. Externally, it may be due to volumes, or it may also be due to higher transaction costs, or any other factors. Going forward, I think we have this window of 5 years where we together as an industry have to work not only within but also outside, along with government, to also try and see that pace of reform carries on, so the transaction costs that are much higher in the country come down. That is one. Second, I think government has done tremendous work in terms of coming out with these schemes, and they're not, if you've noticed, they're not really one focused on any one sector, and there are various sectors that link up very strongly to each other, and I alluded to this in my earlier interjection also. So there are, in a way, pieces of the jigsaw puzzle that really have to come together in a very synergic manner. So if we are able to succeed in PLI Auto to get the localization going for the parts that have been identified, the technologies that we are seeking to do, this would, the depth of localization would also depend largely on how successful the other two PLIs are. Just to give an example, the advanced chemistry cells, the PLI on that comes out. So hopefully within the same time frame, around 4 to 5 years from now, when that PLI runs out, we should have a strong local ecosystem for cell manufacturing within the country, which is absolutely essential, as also the electronics. Besides that, I think the third thing that we really have to look at as a country is how do we address, because going forward this is going to be critical for advanced technology, especially relating to electrification. How do we address the maximum value capture within the country, because this is going to be strategic in many ways. How do we kind of make sure that the newer technologies that come in are not around raw material constraints, global supply chain constraints of raw materials, because tomorrow that is going to be an issue. And how do we keep pace with ever faster evolving technologies? And I think all organizations, whether it be the OEMs or the suppliers or the government, really have to work together. So it's a much more complicated and a much larger issue that has to be addressed, and all stakeholders have a very key role to play. And as far as organization, OEMs are concerned, like I mentioned, we at Toyota are fully committed, and we've been working at this for last so many years. And that's one of the reasons why, despite, like I mentioned, constraints of extreme low volumes, our main products are highly localized. And I think we need to continue to do that going forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gulati, for your crisp response as well. So, in the interest of time, we have, 4 more panelists that we want to give enough time to comment on. So I request everyone to speak, conclude their points in 3 to 4 minutes. So let me invite Mr. Deshmukh here, and let me pick on one of the points that you mentioned about investments in technology. And I know, Sona as a company, especially in R&D, you were putting in a lot of resources. And also the other piece was about development of tier 1 and 2. So if you can please comment a little bit next level on what will you do, or what should the industry do in order to, fast track localization of some of these, of course, leveraging the PLI and other schemes as well. Over to you, Mr. Deshmukh.
Yes, so I think as has been said in the past, PLI is going to be there for a short duration time. I mean, it is not a competitive advantage in long term. So we have to be self-sufficient in terms of localization, irrespective of whether there is a government subsidy or not. And therefore, technology is going to be the major tool for the industry at large to tackle this problem. As you mentioned, we have been at Sona Comstar doing heavy investments in technology. Looking ahead, so obviously, I mean, when you do your own technology development, it takes time to fructify, and therefore you have to look ahead and do that investment much in advance. But looking at the speed at which the industry is moving, and especially with electrification, the speed at which the new things are coming, whether it is electrified vehicles, whether it is connected vehicles, whether it is autonomous vehicles, I think it's, if these Indian companies start doing investments, it may not match with the speed at which the market demands come up. So therefore, we have to collaborate. We have to have partnerships. We have to get technology, acquire technology from outside. And all these kind of strategies will have to be used by the industry. We, for example, have been, I think one of the problems in imports is certain raw materials. In electric motors, for example, we have these magnets which are made from rare earth material, and 90% of that material comes from China, because so entire world is dependent on China for that. So there are two ways. Either, I mean, India as a country starts mining rare earth material. We have resources. I mean, we have reserves of that material, but it's a question of mining and getting that material. Of course, there are a lot of environmental issues connected with processing that material. On the other side, we can technologically develop motors which do not use magnets. And that's exactly what we are doing right now. We have partnered with the Israeli company to work together on this project. So in next year and a half, we should have a motor which does not require magnets at all. So, I mean, those kind of thoughts we'll have to bring out, and I mean, each industry, each company will have to look at what are the critical resources for which there are no alternatives, and can we think out of the box to see whether we can get something to bypass that dependence on those critical materials or critical parts from outside. I think at the industry level, as I said before, because there was a lot of haziness, and I am again right now talking about electric vehicle space, a lot of haziness around how the industry is going to shape. Many companies have not done that investment, but I think we need to do that investment, and that will now happen with the lot of clarity which has come about. But one of the things in conclusion of this particular answer, I would like to say that mergers, acquisitions, and technology partnerships is one way by which we can accelerate getting technologies for faster localization.
I think great point, and especially the part that you talked about leveraging startups, to really bridge that technology gap and think out of the box. I think that's something which definitely the whole industry must explore further. Let me move forward to you, Guru Prasad. Clearly, if you look at some of the points that you made, what really intrigued me is the FTA piece, which was, of course, done with interest of Indian industry in mind as well. But that, in some sense, is also going to be a challenge for localization. So, can you dig a little bit deeper on how can one really overcome this challenge? Because obviously, even after the disabilities being addressed through PLI, if there is sources available in ASEAN, then why would you make it in India, or how can we convince them to make it in India?
Okay, I think if I were to single out one segment where this hits us the most, it's electronics. And electronics, especially in our context, connected to the multimedia, car multimedia and stuff. Electronics penetration is growing very heavily. And also, when we look at electric vehicles, the content explodes in a significant way. And since the car of the future is all about user experience, the amount of the interface electronics that comes in and the clusters and all these things is going up dramatically. So we've also seen that the ASEAN region has been good at consumer electronics for a lot longer than where we've come in. Of course, we are now doing a lot of cell phone manufacturing in India, but a huge amount of consumer electronics typically got done in the ASEAN region and then got shipped all over the world. And free trade agreements certainly made the pipe so transparent and clean that you could just do it in one location and ship it to another country. PLI certainly addresses this in the context of electronics. There's also specs on top. So we certainly think that moving forward, we have a much better way to deal with this. We are already seeing that factoring PLI in today, we start to become as competitive as ASEAN or even better than ASEAN in many of these areas, and we've started to make our offers as if the localization has happened, and we're talking to OEMs to say that we will localize if we were to go through with the acquisition. So this is something that we are pushing very hard from our side. And I think the industry, the government partnerships will be very crucial to see how to work around these FTAs, or how to see how to make changes in this as we move forward to certainly improve our competitiveness, but also do things in the ecosystem which is far more conducive. To wrap it up, I would say, I think PLI in manufacturing, or manufacturing in general, covers three broad aspects. One is the sourcing, one is the making of the product, and one is the delivery of the product. In the aspect of making the product, we are globally very competitive. As Bosch, we have plants which are global benchmarks already today, and both in terms of cost, quality, and performance of the plant, they're global benchmarks. Normally, where we struggle a bit is in the source and in the delivery aspects. And delivery, we've now overcome quite a bit. So it's the source where we have to put a lot more effort. I mean, in terms of how we address our own logistics situation, how we address the ports, how we address material movement, because a lot of electronics, and I'm now just focusing on electronics, is just-in-time action. And there, how do we get this very, very resilient, especially in days like now when we have the COVID shocks? How do we make it very robust and so on? So we're putting a lot of focus on that to ensure that our supply chain overall is very reliable, and thereby we have a lot more value here. So overall, I would say this is a hard one for the government as well, because this is something they simply can't overnight change the situation. We need to work together. PLI is a definite boost. There are additional incentives for electronics, and we have to now start to make the moves and bring in localization, start to use local content towards the OEMs, and then make progress from there.
Thank you very much, Guru Prasad. And yeah, I think the focus on source and bringing greater efficiency in the source part, the entire value chain, including logistics and raw material and child parts, I think that clearly is a big theme to work on. And best wishes for your father's early recovery, Guru Prasad.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's move forward to Vish. Vish, I think you made some very interesting points about scale, and especially, from an engine component standpoint, the specialized steel. I think that came in as one of the requirements as well. But how can we address this? How can we address this challenge? What can we do as an industry or as companies to make it happen? Because finally, every individual action is going to, sort of add up to becoming more competitive and getting greater investments? Over to you.
I think when it comes to something like steel raw material, ACMA has also done a lot of, taken a lot of initiatives in trying to pool the requirement of all the companies, all the component companies, what's their requirement of different grades of steel, and then share that with OEMs. Because when you go and approach share it with the steel companies. When you go and approach each of the steel companies is going to look at your requirement and say that's not big enough. But when the entire industry's requirement is pooled together and shared, I think that helps. So also given the fact that now the PLI scheme has been announced for the specialty steel, I think that should also help. And it's just about continuous engagement with these companies that will help. And apart from steel in particular, a few things which we are trying to do. I think we are looking at this localization from three aspects. One, what is it that the tier 2, tier 3 players need to do, and how can we engage with them, support them technically and process-wise to help them meet the requirements. So that's one which we are very actively engaged in. The second thing which we are doing is looking at what is it that we normally would actually be sourcing from a supplier, but is it something that we can now do in-house in India if the source is not available in the tier 2, tier 3 sector. The third thing which we are also doing is when it relates to certain parts where high technology is involved and the technology is in the hands of a few players globally for certain specific components, we are trying to see how we can create a technology partnership between our suppliers and these companies, or even encourage these companies themselves. So we are approaching these companies themselves to see if they can come and set up something in India. So these are three ways we're trying to push on localization. And just to conclude, I think, yes, as Dr. Pavan Goenka mentioned, more than 20% of the material is imported by the industry today, but then, or rather the imports constitutes 20% of the turnover itself. But then I believe, and I'm fairly confident that with this PLI scheme, there will be a lot of push on localization. And in 5 years, we should see a different picture. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Vish. So moving to you, Vinny, how can we make this happen? And you did talk about a little bit about the cultural aspects, and one of the angles, and when I interact a lot with multinationals, it's just also the amount of they find India fascinating, but also a little bit challenging to do business in. And of course, Southeast Asia has had a lot of these things more foreigner friendly, as I would say. So if you can just please share your views on what we can, 3 or 4 specific things that as an industry we need to do, leveraging the PLI but bringing in greater localization. Over to you, Vinny. I think you're on mute.
Yeah, my apologies. Yeah. So first and foremost, I think we need to leverage the Indian market. Okay. And I guess whether it culturally works or not, at the end of the day, you have to make it work if the market is so exciting. And I think that's point number 1. And that's the reason why everybody is here today. Secondly, I think, as they say, हर चीज का एक वक्त आता है, and I think India का वक्त आया है इस वक्त, and that's why things seem to be falling in place. It may sound a little funny though, but I think, suddenly everything, say, 2 or 3 years ago, there was so much of din and noise against electric mobility. And today you find all top industry leaders coming forward, whether it's largely now in the two-wheeler and the three-wheeler space, really taking center stage, talking, investing huge amount of money. And I guess all this will lead to scales, all this will lead to more excitement, all this will lead to more investments. And with the PLIs, all this will fructify into, India becoming a stronger manufacturing base. Yes, from an industry perspective, we need to continue to focus on more value addition. We need to focus, and an element of this, as we discussed yesterday, is more R&D to happen locally. And yes, again, similar thing will also happen in the larger electronic space, in the consumer electronic space, as the consumption becomes larger there. I mean, we have reached a certain amount of global scale when it comes to mobile phones, but for the others, as it's happening, then electronics manufacturing will also move into the country. The government is talking very aggressively about semiconductor manufacturing. I do not know feasible, not feasible. That industry knows it well enough. But I think all this is in some ways leading to create a lot of exciting times for the industry in general, and more specifically for the automotive sector. That's about it.
Thank you very much, Vinny. And I think clearly the interlinkages is, something very, very interesting, because, the PLIs have come in so many other areas. And as was mentioned earlier, the ACC batteries, the specialized steel, then for capital goods, as well as, of course, for semiconductors. All this is really going to create the next tier 2, tier 3 supply chains in a way that Indian auto component and supplier industry can leverage this a lot more. So thanks very much for all the panelists. We have some more time where we can take a few questions. So I would like to request all the attendees, if you would like to ask a question to any of the panelists, including, Dr. Goenka, please go ahead and shoot your questions, and we'll try and take as many as we can over the next 10 minutes or so. We'll pause here for a minute to see if the questions line up.
Now, Dr. Goenka asking a question is like a principal asking questions to school boys.
No, I meant if there are questions for Dr. Goenka. And I can vouch that he asks very tough questions. So. Okay. So may I request the ICAT team, if you can please relay the questions to us, then we can pick it up one by one.
So can I ask a question?
Yes, please.
We have OEMs and we also have auto component manufacturers. And we heard Dr. Goenka saying that there are a lot of low-hanging fruits which we are not able to take advantage of. Why is it that we are not able to bring tier 2, tier 3 suppliers, get into this localization? For example, fasteners, 2,500 crore is a huge import. What is it that creates a roadblock? And what kind of enabling we need to create to make that happen?
So, Mr. Gulati, would you like to take that question, or any volunteers to respond to that question, please?
I'll
yeah, go ahead.
To the best of my ability. I guess it's really around the 2-3 points that everybody's been talking about. It's either quality, cost, or technology not really being available. I think these are the 3 core issues right now. There are products, like you mentioned, which are definitely not challenging, but there are issues around the kind of costing or the quality that you're looking at, which is simply not available. I think, to simply put, I think that would be the 3. That, if there's anybody else who wants to add.
Maybe I could also just add this. It's not that we've not had success with tier 2s and 3s. And if I just look at how much of localization we've been successfully made, we have successfully made. For example, in the ECU connectors. I mean, these were basic mechanical inserts and interconnect connectors. Of course, there's a lot of reliability issues and issues with regard to the pins and so on. So there is a fair bit of technology in that as well. But we, over the last 5-6 years, we've had very good success and progress made in those connectors. So using that as an example, I think it's also very critical that we work in partnership. If we try to isolate and tell them, okay, here is a specification sheet, take it and now come up with a connector, that's going to be that much more harder for them to comprehend and do everything. So when we work in a partnership to develop a sort of a star supplier base, which can be really global, and their quality levels are as good as any connector coming from anybody or any component coming from anywhere else, I think it's certainly possible.
If I could chip in on this one.
Please, please.
This is a very good example. Can Guru go on mute, please? Guru, there's a lot of background noise. Okay,
Kavan,
so
if you mute yourself, then this echo will stop.
Okay, so if I look at fastener, see, fastener is a situation which is not a very high cost item, but a very critical item. If fasteners doesn't perform, then the vehicle collapses in some sense. And there are some very critical fasteners, for example, connecting rod. And the problem and the reason that sometimes OEMs want to import fasteners is for quality consistency. This is one of the lessons that we have to learn more so at tier 2 and tier 3 level than at tier 1 level. That an approved process, then when OEMs go through a DVPNR or whatever the approval process may be called in your company, cannot be changed. Don't think that this change is harmless. Every change is harmful, potentially harmful. And it's a tendency of tier 2, tier 3 sometimes, for whatever reason, to think that this doesn't matter and we change something, and then something goes wrong with the whole batch, the vehicle collapses, and we go and start importing. And this is a problem in many things, not in one or two things, in many things. And my request to all tier 1s is that you need to really drill down this with tier 2s and tier 3s, that you cannot change the approved process no matter what without getting the formal approval or going to the DVPNR.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Any other questions from the audience? Yeah, let me just try and pull out some questions. But in the meantime, if any of the panelists would like to comment further on this issue. Okay, we do have one question from the audience, and very pertinent at that. Given all the semiconductor shortages and the ripple effect that really has come through after COVID in the last few years, how do you see this having an impact, and what action would industry take? Do you think it will result more in nearshoring and makes a more active case for localization? Guru Prasad, would you like to take that, please?
Yeah, sure. So, Kavan, your question specifically was on the semiconductor, how much of semiconductor can we have locally, right? So, I mean, this is a very tricky one, Kavan, because the auto semiconductors are on a process node going all the way from 330 nanometers, 180 nanometers, 90 nanometers, 45 nanometers. and maybe exceptionally at below 45 nanometers. So it's going to be a challenge to say where do we set up a semiconductor plant and how do we deal with that aspect of localizing which kind of semiconductors that should be made in India. So there needs to be a lot of thought in this, and I'm sure the semiconductor industry is quite enthusiastic based on the recent announcements on the semiconductor policy and of course also on the PLI. I think it's a big support. We should certainly be able to make some progress there. So it would, what I would actually say is that despite having semiconductor, some aspects of semiconductors localized or some kinds of components localized, we will always be, and that's true for every country. In fact, China imports a huge amount of maybe $300 billion of semiconductors. So every country will import. So it's to me not a question of how much semiconductor import are we dependent on. It's also a question of how do we balance this and how much of it we get out of India and become a global house for manufacturing with some amount of localization, some amount of imports, and how do we get the products out at high quality to the rest of the world. I think that's the key way in which we can deal with it. Otherwise, having a full spectrum semiconductor fab in India would be, I mean, a very, very difficult proposition. I don't think even Taiwan, which produces 60% of the global semiconductors, can do everything themselves. So they also still need to import.
Yeah. Yes, Dr. Goenka, please go ahead.
So I would just throw a little bit more light on this, just taking it forward from where Guru said. So first of all, the semiconductor chip shortage has nothing to do with nearshoring or offshoring. It was a situation, and of course, Guru knows it a lot more, and he have endured a lot of pain, as all of us have endured. Guru perhaps more than any of us. It's simply a situation where the industry, semiconductor industry, did not invest enough in technology or capacity enhancement, and auto industry somehow did not put their orders in time, and the capacity got diverted to a different industry, and it's very long, very painful for it to happen. I don't think, as Guru said, that India can ever make all semiconductors within the country, and it doesn't make sense to do that either, because you will then really not have a scale in anything. But the important thing here is that India needs to have some semiconductor fab. Cannot be fully dependent on import of semiconductor chip, not from the viewpoint of the securing the supply chain, but also if you have the semiconductor wafer being made in India, the fab in India, a lot of things gather around it. A lot of upstream and downstream activities will happen. And as you must be aware, that Indian government has really put in a huge amount of money, 76,000 crore of PLI equivalent amount of money has been announced for bringing in semiconductor or the fab manufacturing in India. And the hope is that we will have 4 or 5 fabs in India in the next 5 to 7 years. That, of course, will have no direct impact on the current crisis that we have, but it will be at least 3 to 4 years before these fabs start making the chips, and the crisis hopefully will be behind us much sooner than the 3 to 4 years. But it's a very important industry, especially ECUs and all, for become completely localized of the fab, and whether it's 14 nanometer, 28 nanometer, 40 is a big question that a lot of experts are looking at to see what is the right sort of node for India to get into.
Thank you very much, Dr. Goenka. I think we are a little bit over time, but can we take one more question? Is that okay, Pamela ji?
Yes, please. Yes, I think there is one question. Have you received it?
Yes, I have. So let me read out the question from the participants. Is it possible to have standardized some of the common child parts for all OEMs in India to have scale of operation in India, and SIAM and AKAM can support that drive, and ICAT can support if industry wants to have that as well? I guess question is from someone from ICAT, I would assume. Yeah, over to you, Vinny, or I don't know if there is. some other participant who would like to answer. Yes, Vinny, go ahead, please.
Dr. Goenka has been advocating this for I don't know how many years, and I mean, the principle is that if we can aggregate demand, that's what he says, then we can actually have scales for certain commodities that are being imported solely for the purpose of price competitiveness and not necessarily because of the technology aspect of it. So it is much easier said than done, because it's very difficult to put people to come to a table and talk, and there are competitive reasons, but I mean, very crudely, if I may say so, someday the good sense will prevail. Dr. Goenka, you may add.
No, I won't add anything to this, Vinay. You have said it, easier said than done. I just want to know who asked the question.
The question was from one of my colleague in ICAT, who is looking after the technology innovation platform of under Ministry of Heavy Industry, wherein we are mandated to create innovation and localization to do this import.
If I could just then add to what Vinny said. See, we need to approach this from two ends. One end is from the OEM side, whether they can, or even tier one suppliers, whether they can commonize the child parts. And unfortunately, engineers always think that their part is better than somebody else's. And engineers have to get off of that mindset, knowing that there's a lot of benefit to the industry. Having a child part different from a different company's child part gives me no brownie points. It only increases everybody's cost. And if you really come to, just like many of us have internal projects to standardize fasteners, for example, right? Almost every company in automotive company at some point of time has standardized fasteners. If we can do that across the industry, there is no competitive disadvantage that anybody would have. But we would then be able to create very large scale to do that. But then somebody has to lead that effort. It will not happen by itself. And that's where Vinny and Rajesh Menon are working together and creating a forum by which we can bring this on the table. And if the OEMs and tier one suppliers support this activity, I think it can be done, though it's going to take a lot of effort, but can be done. And some designs will have to be changed. Current designs will have to be changed, and therefore some DVP and expenditure will happen. But this will be all good for the long run if we can make it happen. And this really is a key to create a scale, because many child parts, unless we make it in millions, you cannot justify to make them in India. To make them in millions, we have to have common design.
True, sir.
Maybe just to add a little additional perspective, unless you have another question, I'll withdraw.
No, I just wanted to touch upon this only, sir. I think you remember when we were undertaking car projects, we faced similar dilemma that time, when people bringing on the common table, sharing the common knowledge, and coming to an agreement. I think with Indian OEMs participating, it is easier and it can be done. While getting MNCs to also work on common part will create a tough task. So if we start with Indian OEMs partnering together, I think we can reach to some scales.
And just to give a little perspective, this is
yeah.
Sorry, Mr. Goenka.
Go ahead.
No, I just wanted to say that this is a sort of a dream situation for the auto industry as a whole, if we can get to that level. We certainly have quite a lot standardized, but at the same time, even when we supply to one OEM in India or anywhere in the world, across vehicle platforms, there is not a lot of standardization. So even at that level, we struggle a lot. But what is certainly changing is when we move towards electric vehicles, a lot of it becomes a sort of a rolling chassis. And the level of standardization that's coming in is extremely high. Thanks a lot to what OEMs start to do themselves in the form of OEM.OS. So they create their own operating systems. They define how the interface should be. They define what kind of logic that needs to be there to communicate between one component to another. So they're trying to do a lot towards standardizing this, and this certainly helps. So we will certainly see a lot more of this standardization as we move forward into the car of the future with electrification. But at the current levels, I think it's going to be really hard to reach a very high level of standardization from where we are.
Okay, thanks so much, Guru Prasad. I've just been given a cue that we are over time. We did have a couple of questions, but I think there are some other sessions planned as well going forward. So yeah, I think I would really like to thank all the panelists, Dr. Goenka. I think as always, very thought-provoking inputs from your end. Always appreciated. To Mr. Gulati, I think you brought in very good perspective. Especially from Toyota standpoint and what you're trying to localize. Mr. Deshmukh, you talked about how really investing in R&D and building tier 1, tier 2s, is really going to be, the leverage that we all need to focus on. Guru Prasad, of course, what you shared from a Bosch standpoint, truly appreciated. Thanks to you, Vish, as well. And yeah, Vinny, of course, always a different perspective from your end. So thank you very much to all the panelists and really for sparing time and sharing all the perspectives. And of course, thank you, Pamela ji, for inviting all of us and organizing this event and bringing all these thoughts together. Thank you, and back to you, please.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Everybody
Bye-bye.
for being a part of it. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, sir. I once again thank all the distinguished speaker and panel members, Dr. Pavan Goenka, Sri Kavan Mukhtiar, Sri A. Vishwanathan, Sri Vikram Gulati, Sri Vinay Mehta, Sri Kiran Deshmukh, and Sri Guru Prasad Ndulupur for taking time out of their busy schedule and gracing this webinar with their presence and sharing their experience and knowledge. I thank all the delegates and attendees for their attention and active participation. I hope you found this panel discussion session informative and useful. Thank you all for signing into this session. With this, I'll be concluding this webinar, wishing you all a nice day ahead. Stay safe, stay healthy. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Kavan. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.